When history remembers great conquerors, they usually die on the battlefield or violently clinging to the thrones they stole. But the man who forged ancient India's first major empire ended his life sitting in a dark cave, his flesh wasting away. To understand why, we have to look at the world he inherited. In 321 BCE, following the death of Alexander the Great, the Indian subcontinent was shattered into competing regional states known as the Mahajanapas. The strongest of these was the Nanda dynasty in Magadha. They controlled massive wealth, but they extracted it through heavy taxes and extreme cruelty. They were universally feared and widely despised. Two men saw an opportunity in this resentment: Chandragupta, an exiled young warrior, and Chanakya, a brilliant Brahmin strategist who had been publicly humiliated by the Nanda king. They bound themselves together by a shared desire for revenge. Together, they built an imperial machine. Their alliance produced a system engineered to consume the entire subcontinent through a mix of military shock and administrative precision. The expansion was rapid. Chandragupta systematically drove out the remaining Macedonian governors left behind by Alexander in the northwest, then pivoted his forces east to topple the Nanda capital. The military forces at his command were immense. Greek records estimate he fielded 600,000 infantry, 30,000 cavalry, and 9,000 war elephants. When Alexander's successor, Seleucus I Nicator, marched east in 305 BCE to reclaim the lost Indian provinces, Chandragupta fought him to a standstill. The resulting treaty secured Mauryan dominance. Chandragupta traded 500 war elephants for vast swaths of territory in modern-day Afghanistan and Pakistan. That diplomatic engagement created a massive corridor for trade and ideas. Hellenistic and Indian cultures began to intermingle deeply. You can see the resulting synthesis in regional art, where Indian spiritual figures are carved wearing classical, draped Greek-style garments. With secure borders and booming trade, wealth poured into his capital, Pataliputra. Greek ambassadors stationed there reported back to Europe that this Indian city rivaled the grandeur of the great Persian capitals of Susa and Ecbatana. Pataliputra was a fortress of extreme organization. Modern excavations show systematic red brick foundations, revealing advanced civil engineering, grid-based planning, and high defensive walls. This text highlights the accounts of Megasthenes, a Greek ambassador in the city. He recorded a sophisticated bureaucracy managed by 6 committees. They handled civic duties like sanitation, the care of foreigners, and the strict registration of births and deaths. This passage points out the financial reality behind the bureaucracy. To fund the vast expenses of the army, rigorous taxes were collected directly from the peasants, sometimes claiming a fourth of their entire crop. To pull that wealth efficiently from across thousands of miles, the Mauryan state standardized its economy using silver punch-marked coins. These small pieces of metal carried the emperor's stamps of authority into every marketplace and village. The sanitation boards, the currency, and the taxes functioned as a unified apparatus of control. Every layer of this bureaucracy tightened the centralization of power in the hands of the king. But physical infrastructure can only control so much. Chanakya, the emperor's chief advisor, authored the Arthashastra. It is a pragmatic, sometimes ruthless manual on statecraft that outlines how to secure an empire using a sprawling network of espionage. Under this system, the state deployed spies in every layer of society. Householders, wealthy merchants, and wandering monks quietly gathered data and reported back. Double agents were planted to intentionally feed false information to rival leaders. Knowing his own tactics could be used against him, Chandragupta became trapped by a deep paranoia. He refused to sleep in the same bedroom 2 nights in a row, terrified of assassins, and required a team of tasters for every meal. The Mauryan state operated as an all-seeing entity. Privacy was considered an acceptable sacrifice to ensure the absolute security of the throne. Then, decades into his rule, the foundations of his power cracked. A prominent Jain monk named Bhadrabahu prophesied a severe 12-year famine. For an empire built on agricultural taxation, a total collapse of crops meant a total collapse of authority. Facing unavoidable suffering among his subjects, Chandragupta made a stunning decision. He willingly abdicated his throne, placed the crown on his son Bindusara, and walked away from the empire he had spent his life building. The monarch stripped off his heavy silks and royal insignia. He took up the simple robes of a monk, transforming his body from a vessel of political power into a vessel for spiritual penance. He joined Bhadrabahu and migrated hundreds of miles south. He settled on the rocky hills of Shravanabelagoa in modern-day Karnataka, permanently severing himself from the riches of Pataliputra. Here, he pursued the ancient ideal of the Chakravarti. He redefined the concept entirely. True mastery was no longer about conquering external lands, but conquering his own internal desires. As a Jain ascetic, Chandragupta anchored his new life to ahimsa, the practice of absolute nonviolence. It is a jarring contradiction for a man whose early life was defined by the deployment of infantry and war elephants. As the 12-year famine ravaged the north, the aging former emperor committed to Seleucana. This is a voluntary, highly disciplined fast to death. Sitting alone in a mountain cave, he slowly stopped consuming food, and eventually water. Through this extreme asceticism, he sought to emulate the Tirthankaras, the spiritual teachers of Jainism. These figures represent total spiritual perfection, achieved by shedding all physical needs and worldly attachments. Chandragupta leaves behind a uniquely split legacy. He is the ruthless tactician who forged a unified subcontinent through paranoid surveillance and iron. And he is the silent saint who starved in the dark to find redemption. Chandragupta spent his early years forging a state of total surveillance and iron. He ended them in a mountain cave, seeking mastery over the single thing his armies could never touch: himself.